I want to ask a question. I want to start the conversation about Iraq. What do you think happened in Iraq to have ended up in this situation that we are currently living in? What happened that a lot of people believe that Iraq right now is a living example of the failure of the United States policy in that country, especially during President Obama. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that, first of all, I wouldn't blame either president. I wouldn't even blame the United States. I wouldn't even blame the Middle East and the specific passions and dysfunctionalities that are unique to that region. Countries that run into very dramatic internal difficulties are very common, or were very common in East Asia from the 1940s all the way through the 1980s, until very recently in Central and South America, and we still have that in Venezuela and several other places. It's very likely that you will have situations like this, particularly with different religious and ethnic groups. Secondly, the American effort to fix all of that was a failure. But we didn't create, and this is a very important point because many people in the region and many Iraqis challenge this, we didn't create the dysfunctionality of Iraq. We didn't create the dysfunctionality of Syria or of Egypt or of many other countries in the region, Iran, all of these countries.
But you couldn't fix it.
We couldn't fix it. And we thought we could, and we expended a great deal of money and effort. I don't think we made it worse, but we did not fix it the way over decades we fixed South Korea, along with the people of the region, of those countries, South Korea, Germany, Japan, Eastern Europe and such, Colombia. Those are positive examples. The Middle East basically has negative examples. So that's the first thing. Secondly, ISIS specifically is a result of three things. One is the underlying penchant in the Middle East for Sunni extremist, violent jihadists to seize any sort of ungoverned territory. That is a disease that is in the blood of the region. Secondly, the exaggeration of that through the actions of the Maliki government in looking at the Sunni Arab population as a potential threat, which of course just created exactly what he feared. The third thing, and the most important thing, however, was our allowing all of Syria to become an ungoverned territory. That's where Al-Qaeda in Iraq transferred itself to and became a state and an army. And it is as a state and an army that it is threatening much of the Syrian population, much of the Iraqi population, and all of us throughout the world today.
So you mentioned former Prime Minister Nuri alMaliki. A lot of people in Iraq believe that he was one of the main reasons for what we have today in Iraq. But during his time, people believe that the United States were keeping a blind eye to what he was doing toward his authoritarian tendencies in running the country. Why do you think is that?
Well, I would challenge that. We knew exactly what Nuri al-Maliki was doing all of the time. We also knew that he was a democratically elected leader of the country with the support of all the Shia parties, with the support of both major Kurdish parties, and with the support of a significant part of the Sunni political system, at least up through the removal of Rafi Asawi as finance minister, which came in 2013. So up to that point, you had, one of the most popular people in Fallujah in the government. Given the United States isn't in the business, and to the extent we've tried it, we haven't been successful, of micromanaging the internal affairs of other countries, and given the fact that Maliki had a great deal of support, or at least his government did, we knew what was going on. We warned him against it, but I've yet to hear anybody tell me what action we should have taken when he didn't listen to us.
But when Prime Minister Nuri Abadi came to office, he received a lot of support both from inside and outside Iraq. But yet he hasn't been successful in, to do much. Why do you think is that?
I think some of it is his personal style of governance. He does not coordinate well with the other political leaders. Some of this may be himself. Some of it, though, is a general tendency I've seen. I saw it in Turkey with President Erdogan. I saw it with Maliki. I saw it with other leaders. There's a tendency to think that democracy is a system where if you're the prime minister, you're the dictator. It's a democratic system, so you can be removed or you can be voted out of office, and to the credit of Mr. Alawi, Mr. Jafri, and Mr. Maliki, that all happened, which is pretty unique in the Middle East. But once in power, they look at the entire state apparatus, including the security forces and the judiciary, and whatever financial flows they have, as their toys to do with what they think best. Granted, for the country, in all three cases, and in most cases, they're patriots. They don't want to hurt Iraq. They don't want to hurt the Iraqi people. But by thinking that their decisions have to be absolutely binding and that there's no other, as we say in America, balance of power or checks and balances, you often get bad policies.
Based on your experience in Iraq, do you think federalism would resolve a lot of the problems that we have in Iraq, especially if we have a federal region for Sunni and a federal region for Shias? Now we have one for the Kurds. Do you think that that is going to resolve many of the problems we have today?
Well, to the extent the federal region for the Kurds works, it works for three reasons or four reasons. First of all, the Kurds have their own military forces, acknowledged in the Constitution, but still they're under the control of the Kurds. Secondly, they have their own sources of income, oil and gas. Thirdly, they have the support of the United States and other diplomatic actors, most importantly Turkey. And fourthly, they're dealing with a central government that typically has bigger problems than Kurdistan, namely ISIS, the Sunni Arab part of the country, and the divisions within the Shia political movement, Muqtada al-Sadr on one side, the pro-Iranian forces on the other, and kind of Maliki and now Abadi in the middle. So under those circumstances, that model works and works very well for Kurdistan. But I'm not so sure it would work for the Sunni Arab part of the country. I would be willing to give it a try, though.
Interesting. You mentioned the problems between the Shia, what is called the House of Shia in Iraq. Now, the problem between Muqtada and others, do you think, are we going to see a Shia clash in Iraq?
I don't think so, because there's three overarching unifying and pacifying elements to the House of Shia in Iraq. First, the government. All Shia have an interest in having a government that is largely Shia and where they have a major say because they know the alternative under Saddam. Secondly, the Hausa down in Najaf and the role particularly that the Grand Ayatollah Sistani plays. And thirdly, Iran's interest in not having the Shia fighting each other. And I would add America's interest as well.
A lot of people believe that the end of ISIS doesn't mean the end of problems for Iraq, especially with the rise of now where we see the popular mobilization units, the Shia militias, and they're becoming very powerful. They're even more powerful than the Iraqi army. They've proven to be more powerful. Now, even there's a fear among the Kurds that they might, turn against the Kurds as well. They have been very violent against the Sunni civilians, especially what we saw recently in Fallujah. Are we going to see different kind of problems by the end when ISIS is gone in Iraq?
You will always have problems in Iraq because of the nature of the country, the nature of its position on the road to a, if you will, modern state. But first of all, the degree of problems depends on two things. The wisdom of the government in Baghdad. And by government, that is not just the leader, it's also the parliament, which has to pass the laws. For example, the National Guard law that would allow Sunnis to enroll in large numbers in something equivalent to the popular mobilization forces. But the other factor that's so important that people ignore is Iran. Iran is facilitating a significant portion of these popular mobilization forces. They take orders from Iran through Qasem Soleimani and the Iraqi deputy commander of the popular mobilization forces, Muhandis. And it is Iran who can rein them in or unleash them. One thing, at least in the past, and talking to Sunni Arabs from Saladin province, is that the best discipline from the standpoint of those people, of the various militias, is Muqtada's people. It's no accident that they're not under the thumb of Iran. The people who do the worst to the Sunnis are those who are under the thumb of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. As long as the Iranian Revolutionary Guards have that policy of dominance and essentially war against the Sunnis, and as long as the United States steps aside and allows that to happen, which is what we're doing, then yes, I see problems.
Last question before I go to a break. Can you talk about the Iraq task force that you are one of the top members of the force? What should we expect from that task force?
First of all, we should wait and see what the findings are. A group led by Ryan Crocker was out there recently. I've been out there. Others have been out there who are associated with this effort. The basic point is, in any election year, presidential election year in America, particularly when you're going to have a new administration, the one thing we know about 2016 is that Barack Obama will not be the president in 2017. So in any case, you will have a new president. There's a great effort to try to mobilize foreign policy in various ways.
So, Mr. Ambassador, I want to talk about the problems between KRG and Baghdad. You are aware of the problems they had, throughout the many years after 2003. Why do you think those problems have never been resolved?
They have not been resolved because neither side is willing to make compromises on certain key issues. Those are, most importantly, because it's a core issue, the gray areas, Kirkuk, parts of Nineveh province, and even parts of Diyala province, where you have mixed populations that were not inside the Green Line. I don't think there's any challenge by the central government of what is inside the Green Line, because that was established in the Constitution. But there is a back and forth on the mixed populations. And many Kurdish leaders have told me, wherever Kurds are in Iraq, we will have authority over them, including security authority, because otherwise they could be subjected to persecution and death. And we've seen enough of that to at least understand the Kurdish position. That's the first. The second one is the control of oil resources. That's a manageable problem and has been managed at various points when it involves the oil and exploration in the north of the country. That's different kind of oil than the oil in the south. That's oil that has to be explored. It's difficult to get out of the ground. It lends itself to a different model with more equity for the international oil firms who come in and do it than the model in the south, where the oil is easy to get out of the ground. It's already there. Everybody knows where it is. So that can be resolved, although it still is a tricky issue of who has authority over marketing it, what should be done with the money, the 17%, all of the issues that everybody in Baghdad and Erbil knows. But the second issue, of course, is the oil in Kirkuk. That was originally, up until ISIS came, under the control of the Northern Oil Company. Much of it is still under the control of the Northern Oil Company until recently, based on the shreds of the deal done in December of 2014, it was being exported to the Kurdistan Regional Government and then exported out via Turkey. Now, the authorities in Baghdad have decided to cut that out, so there's thus less oil going out through the north than before. That's a more complicated problem. And then the third problem, although it's minor compared to the other two, is the payment and treatment of the Peshmerga as a part of the Iraqi security forces writ large. And a certain number of brigades of the Peshmerga were incorporated into the Iraqi army. So those are the three big issues.
How do the Americans see the future of Kirkuk? Do you think the future of that city is going to be within the KRG?
I think the Americans would like Kirkuk to be resolved in a way that the people of that province have the primary say. That is, do they want to, as a province, they have the right as a province to join the Kurdistan regional government in the Iraqi constitution. That is, the right to form a region is anchored in the constitution. It's not just grandfathered for Kurdistan, it's open for other parts of the country. If they want to join the Kurdistan regional government as a province, that's one option. I think that the United States would be concerned if any other outcome by either side, Erbil or Baghdad, either to force a union or to block a union, were to emerge.
You know, President Barzani of Kurdistan, he decided to have a referendum to decide the future of the region. Do you think I know United States had some concerns about, the government had some concerns about that decision. Do you think the U.S. government is going to stand against that decision?
Well, I think that that would depend on the circumstances. Given what we have in the region, given the relative unity of Kurdistan and the relative lack of internal problems, and I know all of the issues between the PUK, Garan, the KDP and such, but still, compared to most areas of the Middle East today, Kurdistan is relatively unified and relatively stable. And given the risks of Iranian encroachment on Iraq as a whole, given the possibility of a breakup of the country, given the possibility that ISIS in some form will stay on, the option to find one's own future has got to remain in the back pocket of any Kurdish leader. But the decision to take that option is a very, very serious decision, both for Kurdistan and for the rest of Iraq. And because even if Kurdistan is independent, it doesn't go away from Iraq. Iraq is still there. If Kurdistan becomes independent, but that destabilizes Iraq, one argument is that Iraq has remained a democracy only because of the Kurdish presence in Baghdad. That's an argument that I believe is largely true. Then you'll create an irredentist entity on the borders of Kurdistan whose goal will be to destroy Kurdistan. That's a recipe for permanent war. So, and that of course is exacerbated if Kurdistan defines itself to include those mixed Arab areas to the south of the Green Line, because those areas are perceived by Sunni Arabs and Shia Arabs as part of their territory, part of Iraq. So that's an even greater danger. And then the third problem is, what will other countries think about this? As Kurdistan saw in the summer of 2014, even with the Peshmerga, the Kurdistan cannot count on itself 100% for its own security. It's not Israel. So where does that security guarantee come from? In 2014, it turned out that it didn't come from Turkey, Kurdistan's best friend in the region. It came from the United States. The United States is not going to look favorably on a breakup of Iraq unless it is absolutely unavoidable. It certainly is not unavoidable at this point. So my prediction is the United States will not be happy about that. If the United States is not happy about that, if that happens without the United States agreeing to it, the willingness of the United States to risk its own troops to protect Kurdistan from its own decision should not be assumed. Secondly, and equally importantly, is Turkey. It's not just, Turkey was not in a position, whether it was the hostages in Mosul or for other reasons, to come to Kurdistan's rescue in 2014. But Turkey was willing to see Kurdistan rescued by the United States. Because otherwise, how would we have gotten our forces in?
You mentioned that you are aware of the political issues within the KRG, especially where we see today between KDP and Goran, the Goran movement. What do you think about those internal problems, and how do you think the United States can play a role to resolve those problems?
At the detail level, the United States can play no role. We just don't know the terrain, we don't know the personalities well enough. The United States cannot even play a macro role, because if we're serious, that macro role has to be under the conditions of Mr. Barzani, Hero Taliban, Noshirvan. You have to do X, or we, the United States, will do Y. But if Y is of any significance, Y would be something that would hurt Kurdistan. But I don't think we're in a position to hurt Kurdistan at this point. So therefore, we will certainly tell the various parties to maintain their unity, to maintain their democratic system, to stay within the Constitution, and we will do this at every opportunity. What I do not think we will do is to say, but if you don't, those planes and those weapon shipments will go away. Our support for you in international fora will go away. We'll be aggressive on your oil exports. I don't think any of that will happen. We'll put Turkey under pressure. None of that is going to happen. So I think that it's up to the Kurds themselves to decide whether they want the continuation of this political dispute in the midst of the chaos around them, or they want to make compromises. That's a decision Kurds have to make, not the United States. We will want you to. We're pretty certain we know what the better solution is for Kurdistan. But this isn't about, the decision isn't taken by the people of Kurdistan, it's taken by the leaders of various groups.
Are you optimistic to see?
I am optimistic. You know, when we look at all of these things, you know, Maliki's rage against Tariq Hashemi back in 2011, various disputes, only two things really stick out. The legal campaign against Minister Asawi that had cast a real pall on the Sunni Arabs. They complained all of the time. Maliki did things, but some of it wasn't true. He was paying the sons of Iraq to the tune of 100,000 people were on the payrolls. I monitored that. But the decision with Rafiq Asawi was a very, very bad mistake. Apart from that, Iraqis have managed to deal in a reasonably responsible issue with everything, including ISIS coming in and taking over a third of the country and generating 3 or 4 million refugees, many of whom are being resettled in Kurdistan, and these are Arabs. And we went through a constitutional change in Baghdad. We went through this now almost a year of political turmoil in Kurdistan. We went through a drop in oil prices of almost 75%, although it's come back up, but it's still down by over 50%. And what's happening? The whole place, Iraq and Kurdistan, are still kind of working. And so we talk about all of these themes, and any of them can be another Rafiq Asawi event. But none of them have been. There are many people who want to see Iraq work. I worry about another event like Rafiq Asawi, and I worry about the Iranians. Those are the things that the people of Kurdistan and the people of the rest of Iraq should worry about.
A final question. I want to ask you about what do you think of the role of the Peshmerga in the fight against ISIS? And do you think the United States have provided enough weaponry to them? They always complain, that the shipments, they don't go directly to Kurdistan, it has to go through Baghdad and then to Kurdistan.
Yeah, I mean, that's also U.S. law. That is, these weapons are under the FMS system. There are ways to get weapons through covert means, but the United States has opted not to do that. that may or may not be a wise policy, but our policy is through Baghdad. But we have gotten a lot of weapons to the Kurds, and we've provided a great deal of air support. We've now most recently employed Cobra helicopters in the north in support of the Kurds. So you're getting an awful lot from us, and you're getting a lot from other countries, such as the Milan missiles from Germany that were very important. I think, first of all, the Peshmerga, like everybody else, were faced with a brand new tactic on the part of ISIS, which is essentially, it's sort of a blitzkrieg, only rather than with tanks, it was with heavily armored suicide trucks. And absent very heavy-duty anti-tank weapons and strategy, communications, command and control that was set up to deal with that kind of attack, because you can't have a Milan or a TOW missile every 20 feet on a front that's 1,000 kilometers long. So you have to basically have a very complicated way of rapidly moving these things and rapidly getting airstrikes and all of that. And that takes a lot of training, and there was no training on that. The point is, unlike the Iraqi army, as soon as they were given assistance and as soon as they were able to fall back to better positions, the Peshmerga turned the tide, pushed back ISIS, and is doing a splendid job right now. The Peshmerga is among the best fighting forces against ISIS, and we're glad we have them as our allies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador.
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.